Everybody, our next guest is an emergency room physician, radio host, and best-selling author. His latest book, The Power of Teamwork, How We Can All Work Better Together, is shining a light on a new model of teamwork, making great contributions to the healthcare industry.
Today, Dr. Brian Goldman is here to tell us more about his book and how teamwork can be successfully applied to other industries and our daily lives. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Brian.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I love this. Perfect timing, I feel like, in so many ways, but your inspiration, we're curious to know what did inspire you to write this?
So the big story in the book that kind of is the beginning and ending of the book is the sad story of a young woman named Elaine Bromley, who went into the operating room for routine sinus surgery and ended up with irreversible brain damage because 2 anesthetists and 1 ENT surgeon didn't recognize that she had an emergency that could have been dealt with. She needed a surgical airway because whatever breathing tubes they put down her, they weren't able to insert them. They weren't able to keep her oxygen level up. And for 20 long minutes, her oxygen level dropped down to 60, 55, 40, which is not compatible with brain function. So that's the reason why I wanted to tell that story in the book. But what I learned personally in the emergency department is that as patients have become more complicated, they have 10 diagnoses, they're on 20 different medications, that I function better when I'm on a team. So me, the nurses, respiratory therapist, nurse practitioner, and we're all thinking like a hive mind. So whatever I might forget to ask about, somebody else is saying, oh, did you forget to ask about this? And we've discovered that teamwork in healthcare makes patients safer, better outcomes, and there's more joy working in the emergency department, if you can imagine.
But there are obstacles, as you lay out, because you say in the book that in healthcare, asking for help is like a sign of weakness, and then giving help when someone asks is kind of like you judging the person asking for help for not knowing what they're doing. But then, like, during these COVID times, we've seen that, you know, this can be a catalyst for change. We can start examining new ways of doing things. So, with respect to teamwork specifically, you do have a story about how these times have, you know, kind of push teamwork forward.
Yeah, so flashback 2 years, the beginning of the pandemic, when they were saying that, you know, people who are older, especially physicians who are older, might be more at risk of dying of COVID, and there was no treatment and there were no vaccines. And I remember one night early on in the pandemic, I was doing the night shift, and Dr. Paul Koblitz, my colleague, I love this guy, came in 2 hours before me. He was working from 9 p.m. until 3 a.m. He offered to stay and do all of my intubation so that I wouldn't be exposed to the COVID virus and possibly contract COVID and die of it. Now, there's a time 30 years ago when I would have been embarrassed. What, you think I can't take care of myself? But I almost started to cry, because he was more concerned about my welfare than he was about his own. And that kind of selflessness is what we've seen during the pandemic. And you know, it's one of very few bright spots of COVID, that it has really amped up teamwork in healthcare.
But is that attitude shifting?
Yes, it is shifting, and you know, and one of the reasons why, you know, one of the differences between aviation and healthcare is that, you know, in healthcare, the patient's the one with the disease. They're the one that's having the operation. They're the ones that could die from the complication. Whereas in aviation, if the plane goes down, everybody's going to go down, which is one of the reasons why they need teamwork. Well, it turns out with COVID, everybody was at risk and is at risk of COVID at the same time, and so they've had to develop teamwork. So now patients and healthcare professionals alike are under the same risk, and so they have to adopt teamwork. And I think COVID has been an accelerator of teamwork in healthcare.
On the other side of that, in your book, you do discuss the dangers of a rigid hierarchical system, however, and you discuss an example in the ER of a doctor by the name of Dr. Daniela Lamas, who was trained in this sort of hierarchical culture in medicine, but now is saying, listen, collaboration is in fact the way to go. How, you know, could you speak a little bit about her story and how it contributed to this idea of again, really focusing on teamwork in the ER specifically?
Yeah, so Daniela was steeped in that I alone culture. You know, the doctor's going to breeze into the operating room or to the, you know, intensive care unit, and it's going to fix the problem. She was a young trainee in the intensive care unit taking care of a 20-year-old woman who had taken a Tylenol overdose and her liver was failing. She needed a transplant to survive. She was in critical condition. So Daniela goes into the room with that I alone attitude, and she has a procedure she has to do. She has to put a central line in. It's a drip that allows you to drip medications directly into the heart. And she couldn't get the line. And time's going by, and she's thinking, oh my God, this patient's gonna die because I alone can't fix it. Well, in walked her fellow, then followed by her attending physician, and suddenly this team came to lift her up and to help put the central line in. And meanwhile, there were other patients that needed to be looked after, and other people joined the team to look after the other patients so that the people in the room were able to just focus on this young woman who had liver failure. And Daniela learned a valuable lesson there. She said it was like the best summer camp she'd ever been to. And she said, this is how I want to practice. And that's what she does.
When you put it like that, it should always be the case.
It should be, but a lot of us have this sense that, there are hierarchies. There are, the military, law enforcement have this attitude that there's command and control, and that somebody has to be in charge, and that's true. But a wise leader in a hierarchy, they can be the commander in chief, but they know how to get information. They want everybody on the team to feel safe to say what they see, so that if they see something going wrong, they can save your bacon by telling you about it.
Wow, that empowerment, that's pretty powerful. In your book, you also mentioned that peak performers constantly battle between choosing teamwork or going it alone, as you were discussing with Dr. Daniela, for example. And you actually cite research done with soccer players and how there were actual certain parts of their brain that lit up when they had established a sense or a level of trust with people. Talk to us about that example and how then we can extrapolate from that.
Well, it's such a relatable example because wherever you work, and this isn't just for healthcare, this book is for, if you work in the airline industry, if you work in a repair shop, if you're an advertising agency, it really doesn't matter. If there's high turnover, you think, like, you have to put effort into making the team work, and not just teaching people procedures, but also getting them up to speed on learning their strengths so that you can play up to their strengths and work in a complementary fashion. That takes effort. And if there's high turnover, you're thinking to yourself, it's not worth the bother. Well, the problem with that is that you lose. If you make that effort and get everybody into a teamwork model, well, what the brain research showed is that your brains and their brain, the same parts of their brains light up, which means that you're cooking, you're in sync with one another, and everything works better as a result.
But do you have to be in person? Because a lot of people are doing Teams through Zoom and whatever nowadays because of COVID. So is that possible and achievable if you're not in person?
It is. I mean, there's no question. A lot of people have said to me that it's harder to work in a team when you're working remotely. But it just means you have to support one another even more, listen to everybody on the team, and empower them to work independently, and trust them and not throw them under the bus when they screw up, which sometimes happens.
Like you said, Doctor, I think this is a book that is so applicable in so many, probably all workplaces. So what a fascinating time to release this. Thank you so much for writing it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks for being here as well.
I enjoyed it.
Let's tell everybody at home the power of teamwork. It is out tomorrow. I know you're all going to be running to get this, so do yourselves a favor, grab a copy. We'll be back.